And now let me introduce to you Dulcie Madden, who is the CEO and co-founder of a new energy company that aims to combat climate change, for her entrepreneurship keynote. Welcome, Dulcie. You have the stage.
All right, 𝐴𝐨-𝐸. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I wanted to spend some time this morning telling you a little bit about my journey as a founder and some reflections that I've had along the way. So really quickly, great. The clicker slides are out. All right, I can't really see anyone, but is anyone here currently a founder? Can you raise your hands? Okay. And up on the deck, anyone up there? Okay, hi. Is anyone thinking about being a founder? Who wants to be a founder? Awesome, who else? Okay. Is anyone really nervous about it? No? Everyone feels great? No one's scared? Great, awesome, thank you. Okay, good. All right, well, we'll have a lot of time at the end for, well, maybe not a lot of time, but some time at the end for questions. And so when we get there, feel free to ask me anything. I'm pretty much an open book. I think the goal of entrepreneurship is to be honest and open, and so that's what I'm here to be today. All right, so number one, I think the most important thing, as Bill said, is that anyone can be a founder, right? I grew up in New Hampshire, right there on the left. It's a very small state in the United States. I grew up in a village of about 5,000 people, so certainly not Athens. It was not the birthplace of civilization. I'm one of 6 kids. There was really not a lot. My dad was an entrepreneur, but there wasn't anything super special about my family, other than the fact that my parents said we had to do well academically, and we had to major in either science or math when we went to college. And there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Then I went to Washington, D.C., where I was a biology major. I was really into social justice. I really believed a lot in community development and trying to think about other people and public health and how to empower people and train kids and communities to be better. However, I was a really serious kid. I was very busy in college. I was very achievement-oriented. I would walk around with a very set, scary look on my face, and people thought that I was very intimidating and not friendly at all. My mom saw this, and she said, you know what? You should go and be a kid. Like, you've worked really hard. You went to an excellent college. You should just take some time for a minute before you start the rest of your life and go have a normal life. So then I actually took a year off. If this might be an American concept, it probably is. And I moved to a place called Oregon, which is on the west coast of the United States. And there I was a ski bum, which is basically someone who skis for a year, which sounds made up, but it's real. But I was a ski coach. I was a waitress. Then I moved to South America, where I did more skiing. I went to India for a little while to study yoga. And that was a really nonlinear path when you think about what a traditional professional sort of guideline should look like. But all of the things that I learned in that year off, from being a waitress to being a ski coach, working with little kids, was actually what I think helped make me a successful entrepreneur today. Because, as anyone who's been to the United States knows, waiters and waitresses there don't actually make any money. You make your money through tips. And so you sort of have to be able to talk with people, get them to like you, do your job, and then they give you money, right? So it's a real-time service-based exchange where they're making a judgment call based off of your ability to be a likable person and also to get the job done. And so that was an endless series of small trainings that taught me how to, I think, actually be really good with people. So I went from being a very serious kid to being able to connect with people and be affable. And that was really important because when you're starting a company, people is like 90% of what you have to do. From there, I went back to Boston, where I got a degree in public health. In all those interim travels, I really realized that I wanted to do something internationally. And so from there, I moved to India for about 5 years, where I worked for an entrepreneur and his family. They were building up a program in social entrepreneurship and philanthropy, and I was able to spend 5 years there working on maternal and child health and women's livelihoods. It was an amazing experience. A lot of the same skills, right? Like if you're a white American woman in a very small village in India, asking them about their reproductive health problems, not everyone's going to want to connect with you and tell you about what's happening. And so you have to be able to communicate what you want in a different way. And so again, it was training on a series of skills to help me connect with people, and that was fabulous. Over the course of those 5 years, though, my thinking shifted a lot. And so I went from really thinking about a nonprofit model for community development to realizing that I didn't think that that was actually sustainable. And so what I thought about and what I realized was that for communities to actually develop, that will happen through jobs. And jobs get created by companies, right? And hopefully they're by really good companies that care about their communities and are able to think about like an actual path to keeping those jobs happening and giving people proper livelihoods. And so in 2010, I decided that I didn't want to do nonprofit work anymore because I didn't think that was actually going to get to the end goal that I wanted of actual economic development. And so I applied to business school and was really lucky to get into MIT Sloan and started there in 2011 with a goal, basically, of going to the home of global innovation to figure out how to start a company, because I had no idea how to do that. So when I got there, the number one thing that I was thinking about, there's a phrase in American English called always swim with a buddy, right? So if you're going out swimming, if something happens to you, you want someone else to be in the water with you to make sure that you don't drown, right? And I thought about the same thing when I went to MIT, because I am not an ideas person. I don't actually have any ideas. I'm not Steve Jobs. I'm not Elon Musk. I'm not going to foresee a future with touchable screens or levitating cars or anything else. I'm an operator. And the skill set that I bring to the table is I am able to get people together, organize them, and get a lot of things done. But I knew that when I was thinking about starting a company, I wouldn't be able to do that alone because, again, I didn't have any ideas. I wasn't an engineer, et cetera. So when I got there, I asked a professor that I knew, this guy Ken, and I was like, hey, Ken, do you know anyone who has a great idea? Do you know anyone who might have a technology that they need help with? And very fortunately, he connected me with 3 kids who were just graduating from the undergraduate side of MIT, mechanical engineers. They had a new technology. They didn't have a lot of operational experience, and they didn't know what to do with it. They had an idea of what they were going to do with it, but they didn't actually know. And so my co-founders, 3 guys named Carson Darling, Pablo Bayo, and Thomas Lapoma, we got to know each other over the course of 6 to 12 months. And they said, we want you to join the company with us. Will you be one of our co-founders? And I was really lucky because I found my buddies, right? I found incredibly smart people, really smart engineers who could build anything. We all had skill sets that we could bring together to actually start to work on this problem of thinking about how we were going to commercialize the technology. And that was really, really lucky. Because the other side of this is that building a company is really hard, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But it's so, so beneficial to have someone to share your journey with, right? When you start a company, it's sort of like starting a marriage for all intents and purposes. And you need to have someone that you can share the high points with, and you need to have someone you can share the really low moments with, right? It's really hard to do it alone. And so I really believe in always having a co-founder. If you don't have a co-founder, that's also totally okay, right? Some people can be a solo founder, and that's great. But I would still encourage you to find friends, right? Find your buddies. Hire an awesome leadership team. Find excellent advisors. Find great investors who are able to be with you along the journey and really lean on them because you're going to need those companions along the way. All right, next step. Be massively intentional about how you want to build your company. So I'm starting a new company, and we can talk a little bit about that. But one of the best pieces of advice that I got was to really, when you're coming out of the gate starting a company, to be super focused on how you can stack the deck in your favor before you're even out of the gate, right? So you want to build as many advantages in your corner before you start moving. I will tell you, we did not do this at Rest Devices, my first company, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But if you were thinking about this and you were thinking about, for example, building a venture-backed company in the United States, the number one thing that you need to start with is what is the biggest market that you can go after, right? You want to think about, like, what do you want to do, and then how big is your market size going to be? Bill Ollett talks about total addressable market, like, all the time, I think. But it's because most venture investors are going to want a very large market where you're going to be able to create a significantly large revenue and revenue share so that then they can get an exit that they want, right? Because this is going to be about returns. You want to be able to think about who are your customers going to be. You want to be able to think about how broad is the applicability of your technology. You want to think about how are you actually going to get those returns, right? So you really want to architect a strategy for your company that's going to make sense for the way that you want to build it. If you're not going to raise venture money, that's great. You can bootstrap it, and you can think about how can I be as precise about the amount of money that I need to get a product to market and to get to revenue. If you wanted to do something where you needed to have government contracts, you could think about that, right? But you want to be super, super careful about how you want to build your company because you're signing up for a long road, and you don't want to start making mistakes out of the gate before you get there. For us at Rest Devices, at my company, my co-founders, the undergraduates from MIT, they had developed these sensors that were really good at being able to measure pressure, moisture, and movement. They were really thin film. You could apply them to sort of any piece of fabric or clothing or anything else. And so what we were starting with was an actual technology that was developed in a class at MIT. And then we were backing our way into what would be the actual application. There's a lot of times that this happens, right? And this is a very normal path to entrepreneurship where you start with an idea and then you're thinking about how to jerry-rig it in there. For us, what we started doing with this thin film sensor was looking at sleep diagnostics, right? So there's a lot, I don't know, does anyone hear of insomnia or any sort of problem sleeping? Yeah, great, thank you. So there's lots of people who have problems sleeping. It could be because you just don't sleep, insomnia. It could be because you have apnea, which means that you can't breathe when you're sleeping. It could be because you have various other things. And so by having this sensor, we were able to pick up a person's respiratory pattern, and then we could basically do sleep diagnostics on them. Our initial thought was that we were going to do a medical device, right? And that we would think about like an actual diagnostic product. But when we actually went back and thought about how we're going to build a company, we realized that that would need two things. One, a regulatory pathway. And that would take probably 7 years in the US. And two, we'd have to figure out insurance reimbursements, which again in the United States is incredibly complicated. The average age for my co-founders and I was about 25 at the time. Most of the venture investors in the United States looked at us and said, "You're kids, we're not going to put money into a company that's going to take 7 years to get to revenue." And so they said, "We won't do this." So then we had to think about something else, right? So then we were thinking about a new application for the technology. And what we did then is sort of take a big step back and think about what could we actually do. And I realized that we actually had a lot of parents who were emailing us in the middle of the night, all right? And they were saying, "I am not sleeping because my baby is not sleeping. Can you take your sensors and can you help me figure out how to get my babies to sleep?" And I said, "Oh, could we do that?" And I talked to my co-founders and they said, "Yeah, we can definitely do that." And then they also said, "What are babies?" Right? They had never held a baby. They had never changed a diaper. They had no idea what they were doing. So they had zero understanding of the market. But if we were thinking about what the product could be, they were like, "We can absolutely try to do this." So what we ended up making was a wearable, so like an infant onesie that had the sensor on it that a baby could sleep in, that would be able to pick up its breathing and be able to tell if the baby was awake or asleep, if they were breathing, what sleep stage they were in, and then do a bunch of other integrations with that. And so it was sort of like a super hyped up baby monitor. And that was great, and we were able to do a lot with that, except that when you look at where that was getting us, is it was a complicated product, so it was Internet of Things, it was wearables, in a niche market, right, parents, babies, and it didn't get a lot of love, I would say, from the investor community. And so then we came out of the gate, and we started talking to people, and they were like, "We're also not going to give you money for that." But at that point, we just needed to get to market, and so I was thinking about how are we actually going to develop what we need to do. It's worth noting that as we were doing that, we didn't actually know a lot about how to get a product to market, right? And so one of the other things I think is really important is that curiosity and hard work will get you pretty far. So as we're thinking about how we're going to get this baby monitor product to market, there are a few things we need to figure out. One is we need to do actual product testing, right? So we need to get the product onto babies to figure out, did it work? We need to think about sales, and we need to be able to think about inventory and supply chain. And again, really young company. We were all average age 25, really trying to think about how to do this. The biggest thing that I can say, and this echoes what Bill was saying, is that as long as you are curious, and as long as you're always learning, and if you work really hard, you can do just about everything, right? When it came to product testing, we were really lucky. We were able to find a group of about 25 families who, despite the fact that it was a pretty janky looking product, said, "Sure, put this on my newborn. I'm happy to try this." And because we were really genuine and very careful and asked, I think, really thoughtful questions, we were able to test the product with these families over and over and over again. And as a mother, I can't quite imagine letting a bunch of young kids come and put this new wearable, this new product onto my newborn baby and say, sure, that's great, I trust you. But it worked out, and that was incredible. When it came to sales, right, one of the things that a bunch of you will hear as you're starting your company is, what is your top line revenue going to be? How much are you going to sell? And for us, because investors didn't want to invest in our company, they said, go out, get purchase orders, get sales, and then come back to us. And what we were trying to do was to sell an entirely new product, a high-tech product, into a pretty old school industry. And so what I had to do was basically figure out how I was going to get the biggest chains across the United States to actually buy our product. And that's just sales 101, right? You go and you figure out, who am I selling to? I could be selling to these guys right here, right? And I would have to try to figure out, what exactly are you looking for, right? Do you want to not have to do any work for your sales? So am I going to make it really easy for you? Do you want to know that I actually know what I'm talking about? Do you want to see how I'm going to merchandise it in your stores? Do you want to see what the packaging is going to look like? Do you want to know what the value prop is going to be for parents and for users, right? And so you really have to think about, who is the person that you're making the sale to, and get it across the line. I think that sales is half. Some people are just natural salespeople, and other people is you can really learn and you can train that, right? And that's where some of that waitressing experience comes in. And lastly, for logistics and supply chain, when you're trying to get a really complex hardware product out of the gate, it is really hard to think about your supply chain. And I'm happy to talk about that with anyone over the next couple of days. But you have to think about where the product's going to be made. You have to think about what your COGS are going to be, your cost of goods sold. You have to think about how it's actually going to be manufactured. And there are huge global manufacturers for electronics, right? Think about Foxconn that makes all the Apple products in China. That's awesome. They weren't going to work with us. So what is the intermediate step going to look like? And what we ended up actually doing was working with a bunch of different manufacturers locally. We ended up making a bunch of our own robotics to be able to assemble a bunch of the products. And then we worked really hard as a team to actually assemble the first 5,000 units in our office in Boston. That is not a scalable solution, but in terms of early product market fit, when you're thinking about, can I actually do this? You want to be able to just do the hard work to actually make it happen, and then you figure out, what do we have to do to be really thoughtful about scaling it, right? And if you're in a pinch, hopefully you can just put in the extra effort and make it work. And then from there, I would also say, because I think that a lot of people think that you have to be perfect all the time as a founder, right? But at the end of the day, I think as long as you have integrity, as long as you're not hurting people, almost any mistake that you make with your company is almost recoverable, right? So along the journey of rest devices, there were so many different problems that we had. So as we were getting our initial units out the door, we were really lucky. Has anyone here ever heard of the Consumer Electronics Show that happens every year in Las Vegas? Anyone? It's where they demo, a whole bunch of new products. We were really lucky to do a partnership with Intel, and so they put us on the main stage. We got 3 billion different press hits over the course of the 4 days that we were there. And basically, we came out and we had sold out of all of our product that we had assembled, those first 5,000 units. The number one retailer that we were going with, this chain called Babies R Us in the United States, we were initially supposed to be in 24 stores. They said, hi, we actually want you to be in 470 stores. And we said, great, right? These are great problems. If you have so much demand, that's a fantastic problem to have as an entrepreneur. However, what that meant was that we were having to make orders on our supply chain and spend a ton of money before we had the money so we could get product shipped out the door, get revenue in the door, get investment, do all of those things. What ended up happening was that we ended up going into debt. At the same time, there was a company that tried to acquire us, that actually tried to buy us. We said, no, we don't want your offer. Then they tried to sue us. This is a very American thing. Yes, because they were like, you're young kids. We're going to sue you and litigate you because we think that you'll actually sell to us when you are under duress. And so we'll force you to sell your company to us. And we were like, we're not going to do that. We had an investor who had said that they were going to lead our Series A round, right? They were going to put in $5 million into the company. The last minute, they backed out of the round. So we were still in debt, being sued, didn't have any money. An investor had walked away. And then there was a whole bunch of other stuff that happened. And so for any person, right, you would say, this is terrible. Like, this is horrible, right? We were $2 million in the hole. We were being litigated. We had all of these orders that were out the door. But I think what the biggest thing here is that if you are starting a company, depending on how much you care about it, you can get out of those holes, right? That's when you pick up the phone, you call your suppliers, you say, I'm going to be late with your money. I need you to work with me. Let's figure this out. We're still going to build a big company. You call your best friend who's a lawyer and you say, okay, we are going to fight this lawsuit, and you figure out how to do that. You call all of the people that you're selling to, the retailers, and you say, you want us to go from 24 stores to 470 stores? I have no idea how to make it happen, but I think that's what's actually going to make us be successful as a company. We'll figure it out, right? And so there are things that you can always say no to, but if you want to figure it out, I would say that almost anything that you do as a founder is ultimately recoverable, even if it's really scary. And the only reason that you can really do that is because of people, I think, right? So as we were in so much debt as a company, I actually asked my team to stop taking salaries, right? And this is something that I think hasn't happened in the entrepreneurship ecosystem for many years because there's been a lot of money around. But there are times, like probably around 2008 and some of the other sort of dot-com recessions, where you might have to ask people to take reduced salaries, take less salaries, do layoffs, et cetera. And I was really lucky because we had so many hardships we were facing as a company, but I really wanted to be able to deliver a positive result to our investors. I wanted to be able to deliver a positive result to our team. I wanted to support our customers, that I asked our team, and I said, hi, can you stay with me? If I stop paying you for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, will you stick with me? Because I think I'm going to be able to get another deal done that's going to get millions of dollars into the company, that's going to let us ship our product, that's going to enable us to give you bonuses, get back pay, all of the other things. And the entire team said, yes, we can do that. And so we were incredibly fortunate. People literally with children and mortgages and houses said, we'll stick with you. And everyone worked really hard and went out on this crazy limb and stuck with me. And what we were able to do is piece together a bunch of deals that basically got us into the positive. We paid off all of our vendors, and we ended up being a super cash flow positive company, which was great. And I think that the only reason that you can ever do any of those things that are uncommonly hard is because of your team, right? And your team could be your actual team around you. It could be the people who work with you. It could be your investors. It could be your board. It could be advisors. It could be your suppliers. But you have to keep those people close. You have to keep inspiring them. You have to be open with them, and you really have to keep going. I think the other thing, there's just a couple more points, is that I think you really have to think about what you know and what you don't know, right? So as you're thinking about that team, I don't think that there's a single founder who knows everything, right? And there's different ways that manifests. I certainly don't know everything. I'm pretty aware of that. However, I am also kind of a control freak. I don't like showing up to conversations unprepared. I don't like asking for help. Naturally, I don't really like brainstorming or sort of doing things where I don't feel like I'm prepared and on the spot. However, as you're building a company, it is super, super important to think about what are my blind spots, right? What do I not know? What am I not seeing? And then to reach out to people and think about how am I going to figure out all of these things that I don't know? And I think if you know that from the very beginning, right, I think the best founders coming out of the gate are ones that ask for help all of the time, right? Know what you know, but also know what you don't know. Hire people that are better than you. Hire people who have so much more experience or know so much more than you do. Ask people for help. Find mentors. Find advisors. Literally just yesterday, I'm doing this new company, working on closing out my fundraising round. I said, I'm in a new situation where I don't actually know what I'm supposed to do, and it's a great situation, but I wasn't quite sure. Called up my 4 mentors. I said, what would you do in this situation? What should I know? What am I not thinking about? What are the risks? What would you each do? And so at this point, having made all of these sort of mistakes, gotten all these battle scars, gone on this journey, I constantly ask for help, right? And I'm actually probably pretty annoying about it with all of my mentors, but I'm really asking about, how can you help me? And so for all of you who are out there, I would really say, ask each other for help, ask people in this room for help, ask your community for help, and just be really thoughtful. You don't have to do this alone, right? Even if you're a solo founder, there's so many people around you who will want to help you, and use them. Bring them on your side. And as you do that, Also make sure you're sharing your wins and losses and your mistakes, right? So I think that as a CEO, if there's a win, it's the entire team, right? Like if you did something that's amazing, give that win, give that victory to your team. That's incredible. If it's a loss, it's your fault if you're the CEO, right? Like you did not see the field, you didn't unify your team, you didn't think about that was gonna do. You have to own that. You can have your team come together and you can share in that. You can collectively learn from what a mistake or a loss was. But if you're at the helm of the ship, anything that is a massive, massive failure, that meant that you did something probably that meant that you weren't thinking about it or asking for help or doing any of these things. So make sure that they always know that you're the person who's gonna, be the last stop. I also think it's really important as founders that we all talk about our mistakes, right? I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about entrepreneurship, especially in the American style of entrepreneurship, in Silicon Valley, everything's amazing, everything's awesome, it's all great, people are raising money, people have fantastic products. But at the end of the day, this is really, really hard. Building companies is incredible and it's amazing, but it's also really hard. And so we should democratize it, right? Talk about the things that are hard, share with each other, develop a network of friends and founder CEOs, and think about how you want to do that. And I think that if we all become more open, that will help us all figure out how to do it. After I wrapped up Rest Devices, I was really lucky. There's a venture fund affiliated with MIT called The Engine. And I went and I spent 2.5 years there. And basically what I did was I just talked about my mistakes with the founders, right? The partners there were like, you have a bunch of battle scars, you've been through a lot, you can see a lot of the things that our portfolio has to go through, just come and talk about it. And so what I did for 2 years was I just talked to founders every day. And I said, they would say, what do I do about this? And I'd be like, well, this is what I did. You should not do that, but you can do X, Y, and Z. Or I would give them my advice or recommendation. And having someone who's able to talk about mistakes and be open about it, I think just builds a lot of trust. And if you guys are going to do this, and I would ask you to do that as well, because I think it makes the global founder community that much better. And lastly, I would say don't put your life on hold, right? Like being a founder is all consuming, right? Like it takes up all of your time, all of your brain space, everything you have. But you can't just not do the rest of your life, right? Especially if you're a woman, you have to think about, how are you going to have children if you want to have children, right? That there's an actual clock. And so I was really lucky. And so I was able to grow my family while I was building my company. These are my 3 kids and my husband at Poseidon's Temple on Tuesday. But I think the important part is that you can still do all the things that you want to do. It is not going to be easy, right? Running a company, growing a family, having a family is incredibly difficult. But if you're a founder, you get to design your life. And you can think about, what are the choices I want to make? How am I going to spend my time? Am I going to come to this amazing conference in Greece? Am I going to be crazy and going to bring 3 kids with me, /4? There's a newborn not in that picture. Yes, that's amazing, right? But don't forget to do all the things. Be with your friends, be with your family, live the life that you want to lead, and because that will make you be a better founder. It will help you build a better company. It will grow your community. And so with that, I would just say, if you're thinking about starting a company, everyone should go for it. I cannot think of a better, different way to live my life. And I think it's the best thing you can do. So if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dulcie. That was really great, and what a beautiful family.
Yeah.
We have some questions from the audience, so thanks to the audience for using Eventora. We don't have much time, but I will go with 2 questions. The first one, how do you handle failure and setbacks, especially with litigations that may close your business down, and if you have any experiences on that?
Yeah, totally. So when we got served with a lawsuit, I called our corporate attorneys, and I said, is this the kind of thing that's going to end my company? And they said, almost definitely. And I was like, great, terrific. But I think there's a couple things you can do. One is, and I don't think there's as much litigation in Greece or the EU, which is fantastic. But I think with anything, it's like there's an efficient way and there's sort of like the right way to do something, right? And for my founders, we were like, we're not going to just sell to these people who are trying to punish us by suing us into duress, right? I didn't know how to do litigation. I didn't know what litigation attorneys were. I didn't know what a lawsuit was. But I talked to my co-founders, and I was like, do we want to just do this? And are we just going to give up? And they're like, no, we don't want to go work for these assholes. Like, absolutely not. Like, we're not going to, we've worked so hard. Why would we go and work for these people who are clearly gremlins and are horrible people? And I was like, great point, awesome. And so luckily, one of my best friends was a corporate litigator at a very large firm in New York. And so we rolled up with this firm, Boyce Schiller. And I think they had thought that we were going to show up with like a podunk attorney. And we showed up with the biggest law firm in New York. And the company that was suing us was like, oh, OK, you're serious. And I was like, yeah, we're serious. Like, stop suing us. So you can always think about how you want to sort of approach a problem. I think the other part is, as a founder, failures and mistakes are really hard, right? It is enormously stressful. When we were out of money and we weren't paying people, I felt immense amounts of personal pressure, right? Like being the person who's out on the very end, who's asking people to sort of follow you out onto this this plank over shark-laden waters, right? It is super stressful to ask people to do that. And it's also super stressful to say, I know that we can do this, stay with me, and get it through. I think that when you're the CEO of a company, I think you have to be open. I think you have to be honest. I think you can share things that are hard, but I think it's your responsibility as a leader to also always have a plan, right? And so if I was asking people to do something at great personal risk and potential cost, I had to be able to say, we are going to this point. I am fully on board, and I fully believe that we're going to get there. This is the plan for how we're going to get there. And if we go off that plan, I'm going to communicate to you when we're going off the plan and why. And then you have to have your personal stress at a different time, right? There was a couple of times when I would get a phone call saying that a deal did not go through or something else. And I would just crawl under a conference room table and I'd start crying, or I'd call a mentor, or I'd call a board member, and would sort of lose it and be emotional and like have that stress. But then when I would go and talk to my team, be a much stronger person, right? Because I think that if you're asking people to do something that's so scary, they can't see that kind of emotional fear or scariness in their leader. And so you have to think about how you're going to separate those pieces and how you're going to sort of put a box around what you need to do. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much. Yeah. And the second question is about sustainability. So
yep.
We have a lot of entrepreneurs in the room asking questions on tips of other sustainability entrepreneurs. What tips would you share with them?
Oh, go for it. Definitely. Yeah, for sure. So if you're working in climate, I mean, I think that most people think that the markets are sort of potentially imploding, right? Like that there's going to be a lot of funding that's going to dry up. I would say, however, that at least in the US, and I haven't followed a lot in Greece specifically, but that there's a lot of money going into climate and sustainability, right? And so I think that if you're not doing a climate company, you should 100% be thinking about what does sustainable manufacturing look like? What is sustainable employment? What does it look like when I'm thinking about my footprint? Don't make the world worse. If you're thinking about a new company, and you're like, oh my God, the markets are terrible, but I want to start a climate company, just go for it, right? Like, there needs to be an entirely new way to power our world that is not going to come from a lot of the efforts that are coming out there right now. All of the big energy, the big oil companies are all going to have to figure out what they're going to move to, right? Like, everyone has to take care of their P&L, and a P&L comes from energy. So I would say just go for it. But talk to other people who are doing things, think about like where you fit into the sustainability and the climate pie, and think about what you want to do. But I cannot think of, I have 4 kids, right? I want the world to be a better, sustainable place. I don't want it to be on fire when they're 30 years old. So I would say just go for it.
Thank you so much, and please give a round of applause to Dulcie. Thanks for sharing your experience. Thank you very, very much.